Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Cyber Secrets webcast. In this webcast, we're going to be working through how to build your own hacking lab using the Kali Linux base. So a little bit about myself. My name is Jeremy Martin. I'm a scum-sucking contractor. Been around for quite a while. Started in computer security in around 97 and then started teaching computer forensics and some of the other security-related courses and hacking back in 2004. So with that said, been helping build a few forensics labs and some red teams over the years. So a few things I did want to mention, especially when dealing with creating your own hacking lab, is, to be quite honest, it all comes down to practice. So once you set up the live range environment, set up some pretty decent targets, and then practice. It's all about practice. So in this instance, we did choose to Kali. Kali is very well known. There's a few other distributions you could also potentially use. There's Parrot, there's PlaqueArc. You can even build your own from scratch. Personally, I love the Debian distributions. That's just the one I've become more comfortable with. With Kali, it is at this point still based off Debian. It used to be known as Backtrack, and it has evolved. Right now, we're working on the Kali rolling distribution. So, the benefit of Kali, to be quite honest, comes down to there's a lot of people using it, so therefore there's usually going to be a lot of updates, and they're relatively good about pushing those out pretty consistently. With that said, Kali does have some old libraries built into it. They do suggest you do not put any extra repositories in or minimize what you do have in to minimize the conflictions that you're going to have with some of the software that's pre-installed. So what we're going to be dealing with, we are going to be putting this lab on either a USB thumb drive or an external hard drive. I've been working on this for quite a few years, and for the longest time it worked great on a USB. USB 2 is definitely going to be a lot slower, so we want a minimum of USB 3 and at least 64 gig. If you have any less, you're not going to have much room for anything else that you need. For example, virtual machines, or if you're going to be installing a vulnerability scanner like OpenBoss. A lot of these tools take up a pretty decent amount of space. What you're also going to need is hardware that supports Linux. Without the hardware, you're not going to be able to run it. And you can usually tell almost immediately if you're able to burn the, let's say, Kali ISO or Debian ISO directly onto a thumb drive or hard drive, and then try booting up off it. You will need to go into the BIOS and then change to make sure that it can boot up off that USB. If that does still become an issue, then just make sure that legacy boot is turned on and secure boot is turned off, because we don't want it to get caught up on not being able to boot because it doesn't recognize the kernel. So, going back, we're going to need a big hard drive. I usually use 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte because that allows for legacy boot. And then if you have anything higher than that, you're going to have to get rid of the legacy boot and just go to the GPT partitions. So you'll only be able to do UEFI boot or UEFI. So if you do have an issue with a newer drive, especially some of the solid states, I have had some problems with a couple of really new ones where it just does not have the drivers within Linux yet, so you can't see the drive. So there's a few minor things back and forth, but for the most part, 95% of the time, it should work. Not only on the hardware, but the hard drive. So a couple things I did want to mention with choosing your hard drive. So again, 64 gig or higher. If you do use 64 gig, you can then burn the ISO directly onto that thumb drive and just use the entire drive. If you're going to be using an external hard drive, again, let's say 1 to 2 terabyte drives, because they're, to be quite honest, they're about the same price anyway. Those are a little bit better in my opinion, because the speed's just as good for the most part, but you also have all this extra space. So what I usually do is burn it onto the external device, which could be a thumb drive or an external drive, and then use the majority of the extra unallocated space on that disk for an NTFS partition, which we'll get to here in just a minute. So, When burning the ISO, first you have to download the ISO from Kali. And once you do that, if you're using a Windows box, you can use Rufus, which you can find at rufus.akeo.ie, or UNetBootIn, which you can find off SourceForge. Both of those can take an ISO and burn them directly to either a USB thumb drive or an external drive. If you're already running Linux, you can use the good old tool DCFLDD. And DCFLDD syntax is very simple. IF is for input file, and in this instance it would be IF equals wherever that Kali.iso is, and output file would be the device. So the nice thing about DCFLDD, it's actually the Defense Computing Forensics Lab's version of DD, which it is DD, just with some extra capability. The reason why I use DCFLDD rather than regular DD is because DD goes down to the next line, and you don't know if it's locked up. It just basically sits there until it's done, and then you can see another line pop up. With DCFLDD, it actually shows you how much data is going in, so you know that it's not locked up. So when burning the Kali ISO base, again, you download it. You can either use UNetBootIn or Rufus or DD, and then once you burn it, you're going to want to try to boot up off of that USB. So, once it's booting up, you should have some options. If you don't have anything and it's stuck at a black screen, or says unable to find operating system, or it's stuck at a grub boot screen, that means that the image was not copied properly. So go back a step, re-download the ISO, recopy it on, and start from scratch. So once you do get to the point where it does work, boot into Kali and use the live option. And the biggest reason we want to use live option is because we're going to prep the environment. So there is one kind of trick. If you can't get into the BIOS for whatever reason, because the BIOS it's too quick to get in there, or it's locked by the operating system, you might need to, especially if you're using Windows 10, press Shift while telling the system to restart or reboot. This should pop up a new window that gives you access to some other options. One of those options is going to be booting up off an external drive. If that doesn't, especially again going back to Windows 10, shut the system back down, pull the drive out, put it back in, restart it, and then go through the whole process again, Shift, restart, and then hopefully you should see it again. With that said, if it's not Windows 10, it should be pretty easy getting into the BIOS, depending on what manufacturer it is. F2 is a very common one to get in. There's F12, delete, insert, again depending on your BIOS. So once you get into Kali, you should see a nice little screen, and there should be a terminal icon. Usually it's going to be on the icon bar or the program bar. You can also go to the very top where it says Applications and then find the terminal there as well. A few different ways of getting in. But the biggest thing is you need to identify the drive. So once you open up a terminal window, you can use fdisk --L to list your drives. This is one of the easiest ways to do it. So to make things easier, for example, the system I'm on, it has a relatively small SSD for the operating system. Then it has a bigger drive for the data drive. So that's generally going to be SDB because it's going to be slower than the solid state. So in instance with my system, if I was to build a new lab image, it would be SDC. But I'd be able to see that using fdisk. A few other options, you can use dmessage, and you can also use the mount. So I'm going to go into terminal window real quick and just show you some examples. So fdisk -L. As you can see, it shows SDA 1, 2, and 3. And I'm actually running a version of this lab on an internal solid state drive. Scroll up a little bit, and now we see SDB1 and SDB2. And these are going to be my internal drives. So at this point, I'm going to go and clear, and let's type in dmessage. Dmessage gives a lot of good information. So this is basically content that's working directly with your kernel space. So you're looking at drivers, things in that area. To be quite honest, this is way too much information than most people need. So, to clean it up a little bit, we can pipe it or redirect the output to grep. Grep is a string search tool. And because I'm using a newer drive, an IDE drive would normally be HD for hard drive. This would be SD, which would cover solid state. You're looking at SATA, SCSI, USB drives. So in this instance, I'll go ahead and I'll clear it up so there's less content on the screen. I'm doing clear space ampersand space dmessage space pipe space grep space SD and then enter. So I did an up arrow just to show you the syntax we just ran through. I want to describe something real quick. The double ampersand, what it'll do is it'll run the first command and then wait until that command is done, and if it is successful, it'll then run the second command. You can get very similar responses if you just do a semicolon. The problem with the semicolon is it's going to run regardless of what happens. So as soon as I hit enter, it popped up the same information, but let's say if clear failed for whatever reason, it would still run the second command. But if you do ampersand ampersand, it won't. So it depends on what you need it for, what you're going to use it for. In most cases, the double ampersand is probably one of the better options, especially if you have a lot of different programs that are reliant on the other programs. So in this instance, we see SDB. It's a relatively large drive. And then we see information related to SDA, which is a considerably smaller drive. So that's going to be my solid state. The bigger one's going to be the internal drive. So if I were to hook up a USB thumb drive to this, you would then see SDC. Another application that you can use is just your good old mount. So again, I'm going to clear, ampersand, ampersand, then run mount. Again, a lot of information is coming up through here. So I have a lot of stuff on here. So going back to, we're going to pipe it, grep, then just to show SD. And this gives a little bit more information of what we need it for. So in this instance, we're seeing SDA, SDB. So SDA1, one partition's mounted. That's going to be the bootable system. SDA3 is going to be a persistent encrypted drive. So if you wanted all this information into a text file to make things easier, you could absolutely do, let's say, fdisk -L, and then redirect the traffic to, let's say, test.txt, ampersand, ampersand, and let's do good old dmessage. I'll just, for MSG, oh, sorry, bad spelling, message, and then pipe that to grep, SD, append it to test.txt, and then we're going to open up, let's do gedit, test.txt. I ran it, dumped everything to this file that I wanted it to, and now we can basically analyze it and get exactly what we need. So those are 3 ways you can identify what drive that you're looking for. And as we can see here, usually the drives are going to be in a /dev for device, /SDA, SDB, and SDC. So be very careful when trying to identify the drive and where you're going to be copying stuff to. Because to be quite honest, you can easily wipe out the wrong drive. At that point, you just lost your operating system. You're not going to have a good day. So make sure you have the right partition, the right drive. So in this instance, creating your own attack environment. We are looking at dev/SDC, so at the bottom image. It's only a 64 gig. This specific one was a solid state drive. But we wanted to identify it. We used the term gparted. So we already knew that it was SDC based off of fdisk-L. And then once we bring it up here, we see that there's already two partitions. The first partition is going to be the bootable partition. The second partition is related to the UEFI. So this allows it for, again, legacy boot or booting up off the new systems. Now we have all this extra area, in this instance only 64 or 60 gig. So what you'd want to do that in this area is right click on the unallocated space, then left click on new, and then choose basically the entire area for your drive. If you're using an external hard drive, it would be slightly different. I would only pick 64 to 128K, format that as ext4, and then use the rest and format that as NTFS. So then you would have 4 partitions. And the huge benefit for that is you can dump stuff, all kinds of stuff, onto that NTFS partition from within Linux, and then hook it up to a Windows box, and now you can see it in Windows, or vice versa. So if you're trying to get videos, reports, things in that area, back and forth, very easy way to get it out. The other reason why I use it, and I usually use 2 terabyte hard drives, I again have this same lab environment, so we can use it for testbed, and then also for real-world investigations or pen testing. Also put portable apps and a few other tools on it. So again, we can bounce back things and forth. We can also use things such as the DCF-LDD to do imaging and then copy suspect images of hard drive onto that NTFS system. And then we could basically analyze it with our forensics tools on the Kali side or Debian Linux side, and then also use other tools on the Windows side. For example, a free one would be Autopsy. There's an Autopsy GUI, which is actually pretty good for a free tool. Or you can use other tools like NCase, FTK, and so forth. So, with that said, we're just going to target on this third partition, which we're going to be dealing with in ext4 file format. So the way to set it up, and for this instance, we're going to assume that it's going to be SDB3. So, once you identified it, you type in crypt setup space tac verbose space tac verify tac passphrase space lux format space /dev/sdb3. This is then going to ask you for password. So if that specific instance, make sure you remember the password. This is going to be password number 1. Always remember it. Once you put in that password, now you're going to want to set up the rest by typing in crypt setup, then lux open. This is going to allow you to mount /dev/sdb3 as a virtual drive called bootable-USB. And the reason why I say bootable-USB because it's easier to memorize, easier to keep things straight. So in this instance, we're going to actually format it as an ext4 file system. So we're going to label it as persistence and make sure you spell this correctly. PERSISTENCE space /dev/mapper/bootable-USB, because this dev mapper bootable USB was created in the previous section. And just to double check to make sure everything is proper, we're going to e-label just to make sure that the label absolutely is persistence. So E2 label space /dev/mapper/USB space persistence. The biggest problem here, just to keep everybody appraised, is that if you try to boot up the system after this and it doesn't boot up properly or it doesn't ask for a password, it's usually because somebody misspelled persistence. So just make sure that this is spelled correctly. I cannot stress that enough. Saves you some time. Now we're going to set up the environment to actually act persistent. So you do this by mounting the drive. So we're going to make a directory. So tac p space /mnt/bootable-USB. So now that we're creating this folder, we're going to mount the /dev/mapper bootable USB to the /mnt bootable-USB. So this ties everything together, so now we can actually use it a little bit easier. This is the key to persistence. So you have to create a file called persistence.conf. And the easiest way to do it, just in one line, would be typing in echo space double quote / space union double quote space greater than sign space / mnt / bootable -usb / persistence.conf. And what this does is echoes the / space union into a new file called persistence.conf in the proper folder. So after this is created, you unmount the drive, just doing a umount space / dev / mapper / usb, then close it. Once you close it, you can reboot. One extra step you can add here is actually use the crypt setup and go to Lux Nuke. If you do Lux Nuke and then point it to the /dev / sdb3, it's going to then ask you for the original password. So again, don't forget that original password. And then it's going to allow you to add a second password. For a Lux Nuke password, makes things a little bit more interesting. Let's just put it that way. So, if, and think of this as plausible deniability, if for whatever reason you're getting coerced or extorted into giving up a password by some bad guys, you can give them the nuke password. If they put that in, it destroys the entire partition with all your sensitive data inside. So again, don't break the law, but in the cases to where if you're traveling, something happens to where you need to give up the password to somebody that's, again, a bad guy, give them that. It works, but it's not going to give them access to all the stuff that you're trying to protect. So once you add that, basically it comes down to reboot. Here's the trick. If everything worked perfectly, you should be able to reboot just like you did before. But instead of using the live option, you're going to want to use the encrypted persistent option. That should say great and bring you to a password. So after you see a lot of things go on the screen, once you put in the password, it'll log into Linux. If it does not ask you for a password, that means you're going to have to backtrack, go all the way to step portion where you log in as live, and then create that persistent partition all over again. The biggest, I guess, challenge or failure at that point is, again, usually people misspell persistence, case sensitivity, there's a few items there. But once you go through all those steps, you should be able to build the persistent drive and log right into your new stored saving location. So, going back to here, if all worked out, you should definitely be in the Linux environment. So the biggest difference between the persistence and live is anything you do on live, it goes away. You won't be able to save a thing. The benefit of that is you can play all day long with it. You can break it. You can destroy certain files, things in that area. But once you're done, you just reboot and you're back to factory default. If you're in persistence, everything you do gets saved. So there's pros and cons for both ways. So now it comes down to, what do you do after you install? So some of the things that definitely suggest here would be change the root password. First thing. And also, remember the root password. I cannot state that enough, because if you forget how to log in, and basically it's going to be faster just to start from scratch. So once it's changed from the default TOOR password, then add a new user. And we're going to go through some of the steps here in just a minute, but easy way to think about it is you never want to log in as root all the time. That's just bad practice. A lot of people do. I even catch myself doing it every once in a while if I just want to quick test things in that area, get something set up. But logging in as root is just, it's bad security mojo. So add a new user, and preferably add it to the sudoers account. So this can be a little bit of pain, but you'll get used to it. Anytime that you need to run something that needs elevated privileges, or let's say direct access to hardware, you would just need to type in sudo and then the command. Then you'll probably have to type in a password, but outside that, it minimizes the probability of bad things happening. If you're just logged in as root all the time and you run the wrong piece of software, that software now has a root. Another thing is change the default SSH keys. If you set it up to where you can SSH into your Linux box remotely, then that means if everybody else has the key, and especially if you didn't already change the password, because if you don't change both, there's a good probability neither of them get changed. That means anybody running Kali can then log into your system. So definitely change default SSH keys. And then, of course, upgrade and update. So the first step when changing the password is simple. Simple, stupid. Use the passwd command. So passwd space username changes the password to that username. Of course, you're going to have the original password and then double enter in the new password, but it's the easiest way to do it. If you don't have a user account, it automatically defaults to root. A lot of these tools do. For example, SU for switch user. If you do SU, switch user space new user, it's going to then ask you for the login credentials to new user or the new user's content. If you just do SU, it automatically defaults to root. And that's why another people usually call it super user instead of just switch user. So again, depends on the context. If you are going to be adding a new user, this is an easy way. I know that there's a dozen different ways of doing this, but this basically gets it done in 2 lines. Or if you truly only want it done on 1 line, you can do, at the end of bash, do a space ampersand space passwd new user. So to explain a little bit, this add user in -m is basically making the user, and new user is the username that you are trying to create. So in this instance, it's just new user to make things easier. And then -uppercase G for group, we're adding it to the sudoers. And the -s for shell, we're tying it to the /bin/sh. So whenever we're creating this user, again, making new user, adding it to the sudoers group, and giving it a shell. And then as soon as it's done, we change the password or create a password. So using at least 1 user account is great. Using multiple user accounts might even be better. So as far as creating SSH keys, this process right here, this cd space /etc/sh or ssh slash space ampersand make dir back, what this is doing is it's going into the SSH folder and creating a backup folder. And then they're moving all the SSH keys into the backup folder. Because worst case scenario, something fails, this makes it a little bit easier to get back to for at least a temporary fix until you can build new keys. The third line, dpkg tac reconfigure space open SSH tac server, what that does is that rebuilds the SSH keys. You can easily do a diff or an MD5 sum difference between the two, but it's a good idea to look at the timestamps and make sure the hashes don't match. But this, in a nutshell, is the easiest way to rebuild your SSH keys. So as far as upgrading and updating, this is also where it kind of gets a little tricky. So I personally like multi-arc configurations. And multi-arc basically means you're going to have your 64-bit, and now you're going to have 32-bit as well. If you add the dpkg space tac add tac architecture space i386. The reason I do it, because a lot of the tools I use actually have the 32-bit installs, and they don't really have a 64-bit variation. For example, I've had some issues in the past with Skype, TeamViewer, and some other tools that I use. With that said, of course, you don't have to. It's going to minimize the likelihood of tool usage. The other thing I wanted to mention was multi-arc architectures usually don't cause any problems. I know every once in a while there might be an issue, but for the most part, they're pretty solid. So after you add the architecture for i386, you do need to do an apt or apt-get space update. Since this is a newer version of Aptitude, APT should be on your Debian-based or Kali-based system. But apt-get is the old way of doing things. So either way you see it, should work. So, going back to here, what I do, especially right off the bat, is I do apt space update space ampersand ampersand space apt space upgrade space tac y space ampersand ampersand and apt space disk tac upgrade space tac y. What this does, the update gets an updated list of all the versions of the software that's already installed on your Kali distribution. What apt upgrade does is it will look at those versions, and if there's a newer version, it'll try to download and upgrade that software. The tac y will automatically put yes if it says, are you sure you want to install the software? So that just automates a little bit of the process. The apt-dist upgrade is a little bit different. So upgrade just does the main software. Dist upgrade does the system software, such as kernel, things in that area. The dist-upgrade on a daily basis isn't necessarily a good idea. I know I put it into an alias whenever I do a full-blown upgrade. I just want to type in one word and have everything magically update itself. Here's the problem. I've come across several instances over the years to where some of the package managers do not update properly. They remove things to where some software doesn't work. For example, VirtualBox. There was an issue, did a dist upgrade, and then VirtualBox stopped working. And the main reason why is it came down to being one of those scenarios to where as soon as I upgraded, it actually took away an old Kali or old kernel image. And VirtualBox is only set up or bound to that kernel image in the DKMS. So what I had to do at that point was then go to Debian's website, also Kali's website, download the old image, and then put it back onto the system, reinstall it with DPKG, and then so I have the two different images linked. And then a few months later, they fixed it, so I was able to get rid of the old kernel image. So probably wouldn't run this every day, but this is how you would do it. There's a couple other things I would also mention, especially depending on how you want to use it. I know if you want to use it as a standalone, that's great. That's one of the main reasons it was built. But it's also built for being able to use on outside targets. I do use it for training. I use it for internal assessments. I use it for demonstrations all the time. I will also use this same image for full-blown pen tests or an incident response where I have to acquire evidence. So, with that said, if you are attacking anything on the outside, then realistically just point to those IPs. Just make sure your network connection is working properly. You shouldn't have a problem. If you're just doing standalone, install VirtualBox. You could install VMware. There's a bunch of other tools out there that do virtualization. I just personally like VirtualBox. There's a lot of help out there. It's free. It can even convert virtual machine images into VirtualBox images. If you are going to be tethering, using any other, I guess, third-party connections, things in that area, especially if it's hardware, you may need drivers. So that might be a little bit extra effort on your part. Sometimes it may just work. For example, if you're trying to attack Android devices, you're probably going to have to install ADB. And the easiest way to do that would be apt space install space ADB for Android Debugging Bridge. And usually you don't even need the entire Android toolkit. You just need the ADB. Excuse me. If you are going to be using any third-party tools like the Bash Bunny, the Wi-Fi Pineapple, things in that area, you could do all of this on your own. But I'm a huge proponent of these tools primarily because it saves time, and time is money. So, for example, the Wi-Fi Pineapple, you could easily do everything on the Linux box yourself. But it's going to be a lot of different windows you're going to be popping open, documentation. The automation is going to be, you're probably going to have to write something yourself for it to tie things together. With the Wi-Fi Pineapple, once you get configured, basically as soon as you add power to it, you can walk away and come back 24 hours, and then a lot of your logs are going to be propagated. Man in the middle, things in that area. So, just saves money, especially with time. So a couple things I do want to mention with installing tools. Like I mentioned before, the apt space install, that's the easiest way to do it. If you want a lot more things automatically added to your Kali or to your lab instance, one thing you can do is type in apt space install space, is it Kali-Linux -all or -full. If the instance that you have doesn't already have all those options, then it's going to download everything to fit that specific section. Some other software that I definitely like using, which is usually not in those full-blown distributions or even targeted distributions, Kali, would be GDebi. GDebi allows you to install deb files for Debian content, because again, Kali based off Debian at this point. And to be quite honest, you don't need GDebi. GDebi basically just saves a couple extra keystrokes, because you can get the same result using dpkg space taci space the deb file, as opposed to just GDebi space the deb file. So it's all personal preference. The other ones I definitely like, especially if you're going to be using this as a lab environment, is VirtualBox and VirtualBox DKMS. This allows you to basically run your virtual machines. So you have LibreOffice. It basically allows you to build reports. So think of this as the competitor for Microsoft Office, except for Linux and free. Git, so you can do Git clones of other software. And of course, Tor. Tor is great. I love it. It's been around for forever. Again, it's not the perfect solution, but it's definitely useful. It has its capabilities. And then OpenVAS. OpenVAS is a great vulnerability assessment software. I've used Nessus, Retina, and a few others for a long time. OpenVAS is not necessarily as fully featured as some of the commercial tools, but for free, it's an amazing tool. But a lot of these tools take up a lot of space. So going back to like we were talking before, is you're going to need more disk space. So yes, you could get away with building this lab on a 16 gig thumb drive, but you wouldn't be able to install OpenVAS. You could potentially be able to install OpenVAS on a 32 gig thumb drive, along with a bunch of the other tools, but then you're going to run out of space when you scan people. So the 64 gig, that's the reason or theory behind it. And then again, if you're using a 1 terabyte to 2 terabyte drive, even better. Just some of the other tools to consider. TrueCrypt was replaced by VeraCrypt. VeraCrypt is a great tool. You can do encrypted containers, mount those containers. You can also do plausible deniability in those by adding a hidden container inside of that as well. Excuse me. You have ClamAV, your good old antivirus, which what's interesting about Clam is it doesn't just look an antivirus anymore. It also has the ability to do DLP for data loss prevention. Look for strings like credit card numbers or social security numbers. They have added a little bit to it. You have ExploitPack. ExploitPack is a competitor to Metasploit Framework. The interesting about ExploitPack is it is a graphic user interface now. I know some people love it. Some people prefer it over Metasploit, vice versa. Some people prefer Metasploit over this one. This one, however, ties in with Exploit's database and a few other databases. So right now they're saying it has over 38,000 exploits built in. The problem with it comes down to they're not fully functional. You're going to have to play around with the code. So it's not as not forensically sound, but it's not as user-friendly as even Metasploit is. So it's basically whatever your preference. There's Velavation Framework and the Fat Rat. These two applications are great. Again, completely free, open source. And their whole goal is to change a signature of an application to where you can potentially bypass antivirus. So possibly an intrusion detection prevention system, but primarily it's for antivirus. So the, I guess, challenge here comes down to once you run it in memory, if the AV is good enough, the code's still going to go to canonical form, and depending on what the signature is, you still might get caught. But as far as scanning the compiled code, you can change it enough with both Velavation and FatRat where it's probably going to bypass it and basically be unseen. Sniper. Sniper is interesting. It grabs a lot of recon tools and then ties into Metasploit framework. So, best case scenario in a utopian lab environment, you can point to that lab, for example, Metasploitable 2, and after probably 20-30 minutes, after it goes through a bunch of other things, it'll start generating sessions within Metasploit. Do a full-blown exploit or an automated exploit, and then connect the session in. So the thing I would kind of steer you away from is never use any of these attack tools on anybody that you do not have authorization to attack, because you're breaking the law at that point. If you do have authorization, that's great. But keep in mind that some of these are extremely loud. If your goal is to be quiet, do not use Sniper. If your goal is to test the ability of the incident response team of identifying the threat, absolutely, Sniper's something great to use. Another good one would be called Spartan, or Sparta is already installed on Kali, so you shouldn't have to really worry about installing it. If it's not, again, simple apt space install space Sparta. Same basic principle. Very, very loud. GoFish. GoFish is a phishing framework. It actually works great. I've used it for a while. I know there's a lot of other phishing frameworks out there. It's just I like this one because it's standalone. They have a version that's standalone for Linux, Mac, and Windows. The trick, though, is if you want full-blown capability with the GoFish, you will need a routable IP address on the internet to where your targets can actually get to. Or you can do your phishing assessment or phishing attack inside the organization, and as long as they can get to your IP address, you should be good to go. The nice thing I do like about it as far as what it keeps track of, first one is how many people were sent successfully, how many people opened the email and actually viewed it, how many clicked on a link, and then if you're doing any sort of cred capturing or credential capturing, it'll grab that content as well. So it gives you a nice little breakout of percentages. So this one, vulnhub.com. This one's actually a pretty good one as well. So with vulnhub.com, they have a lot of virtual machines that are pre-built with vulnerabilities on it. So this way you can basically import them into your lab and start attacking them right away. Most of them are probably going to be VirtualBox. I know sometimes they do have VMware, but again, VirtualBox is kind of the de facto standard in this area. So several other sites do have capture the flags as well, but that's definitely one that I would look into. So keeping in mind, going back to what we're talking about here, the two sides. First side, standalone, you're only attacking your system. You're only attacking virtual targets. So you're having your Cyber Live fire range, and your Cyber Live targets are going to be these VirtualBox systems. Most of the time, when you install VirtualBox, you're looking at the network 192.168.56, for example, dot something. And a lot of times it'll usually start off, let's say, 100 or 101. So as long as you know the subnet, just make sure that whatever other network that you're on does not share that same subnet. And always make sure that you're also looking at host only for your network interface. So if you are using it for learning, training, labs, things in that area, as long as you're staying on that subnet or within that subnet, you should be fine. And I would definitely make sure that you're using a LAN subnet and not an external subnet. For example, stay in the range of 192.168 something, the 10 network, or the 172.16 something to 172.31.255.255. So as long as you stay within those main networks, you should be fine. The other side is all these tools that can be used in the Cyber Live fire range can absolutely be pointed outside your range. You just need routable traffic to that target, and always make sure that you have permission. So, a couple things I did want to mention. So, of course, quick demo. A few things I do want to push on here. We're looking at, we'll go into aliases here in just a second. Go ahead and clear this window. Once I've cleared it, I'm running Virtual Manager. These are actually pointing to an external drives. That's why they say they're inaccessible. But as you can see, I have a bunch of Linux systems. I even have some Win 10 systems, Win 7. So a lot of these, I can actually run about 10 of them at a time and not really have that big of a negative effect on my system. Granted, my system here does have 32 gigs. With that said, if I were to run VMware on a Windows box, usually if I do more than 3 to 4, then it becomes problematic. But with this being said, absolutely you can set up host networks and then multiple host networks with different subnets, so you can build up your own multi-tiered or multi-layered environment. For example, pretending one's in a DMZ. Once you compromise that one, you can then pivot from that one onto another system into a completely separate network, as long as they share a route to both sides. So as far as aliases, the term alias actually basically prints off all the aliases that are on your screen or within your system. To edit these aliases, I'm going to do gedit, and then mine is going to be bash and aliases. So I do apologize, .bash aliases. So a couple things here. This dot indicates that it's a hidden file. This ~/ indicates that this is the home folder of the user that I'm in. And right now, I'm in root. Even though I said don't use on root, I'm doing that right now. So I'm geditting, home folder, hidden file called bash_aliases. And this is the file that I put all my aliases in. And I'm going to go back to the main screen. So if you want to add any alias, the syntax, as you can see on the very bottom, is alias space your shortcut word. So in this instance, I have OV for OpenVOS equals single quote, the commands you want it to do, end in a single quote. So going back to the screen here, this alias for, let's say, IDS, alias space IDS, which is the keyword or shortcut key, equals single quote snort, verbose, config file, where it's at, and then ending in a single quote. And the reason I do that is because I'm lazy and I don't want to type in snort space -v tech c /etc/snort/snort.conf. So a couple other aliases. I'm going to go ahead and clear this window real quick, then type an alias again. I use this one a lot. This is called Change Me. And I built this one to get past DHCP systems sometimes. So in this instance, I do, again, alias Change Me, and that content within there is going to be ifconfig. And I actually used this on a local pen test last week. So with that being said, I usually have a WLAN here instead of an ETH0. I just wanted a quick fix, and it worked great. So this right here turns off the interface, then uses MAC changer and generates a spoofed random MAC address for that interface. So the next phase, I do DH client, remove the content for ETH0. And I want to make sure it's removed. So I do remove, and then the actual file. And then I do ifconfig, turn it back on, and do DH client back on that ETH0. Because the system is now broadcasting a different MAC address or spoofed MAC address, if there's a DHCP server running on that network, it's then going to generate a new IP address for my system. And I've had to use this quite a few times over the years for, let's say, problems with connecting to servers. I might be getting blocked by security software, IPS, things in that area. Or I might just want to mess with the security team. So what I'll do is I'll do a bunch of scans with one. I'll run Change Me, and then start a few more scans with another IP address, another MAC. So if they're a good security team, they'll be able to see the pattern of all this traffic happened from this device. Now it's stopped, now it's another device. So chances are, yeah, somebody could be physically moving from system to system, but realistically, spoofing is just that much easier. And then realistically, they could go down to the switch that's that MAC address is being associated to and move on from there. So a couple other ones I do like. Here we have Clean Me. So Clean Me actually uses one of the politician's favorite tools, BleachBit. It kills Tor, kills Firefox, basically gets rid of some cache, and then runs BleachBit. So it cleans up systems. So think of it kind of like a makeshift CCleaner or some other cache remover. Another one I use quite often actually is going to be things like, again, OV we talked about. But here more specifically, we're talking about upgrades before. I built one called Power Up. So you can see a lot of my naming conventions are related to Alice in Wonderland / The Matrix, or just games in general. So here, what we do have is the depackage configured to make sure everything's installed properly. Once it is, it goes back to doing an update, upgrade, dist upgrade, then an auto remove, auto clean of all extra content, just to kind of get rid of stuff, and then purge anything that again needs to be fully uninstalled, and then install some updates for very specific tools that I have in there. So within that .bash_aliases file, that's where you would add certain update routines for your tools. So at this point, we just covered aliases. Going to clear. Now we're going to look at Tor and proxy chains. So this can be used for a lot of different purposes. But like I mentioned before, if you don't have it installed, apt install Tor. As soon as you hit enter, as you can see, mine's already installed. So to start it, type in service Tor start. You don't have to do this, but I'm just doing this because it's a demo. Run status to show that yes, it is active. But you don't have to run that. I just ran it to show you. So here's how to test it. So I'm going to use curl and go to a website called ipinfo.io /IP. What this does is it grabs my external IP address. So now I want to see if proxy chains is actually working properly with Tor. So now what I'm going to do is spell it correctly, and if it works, voila, we now have 220.101.30. So this is kind of the cool trick. You could use any tool right after proxy chains, and it's probably going to work. Granted, some programs or applications do have potential issues with it, but for the most part, it's usually going to work fine. And again, I just ran good old Firefox, and we now see the good old IP address. So now, I'm going to go and Control-C out of this, clear the window, and go back to the slide deck. So at this point, pretty much covered the basics of how to create your own hacking lab. And there's a lot more that you can customize, that you can do, things in that area. But to be quite honest, it's one of those scenarios to where once you are comfortable with the content, once you're comfortable with the tools, you probably should only install the tools that you need, no more, no less, things in that area. You could even go down and install the bare bones version of Kali and then only install the specific tools that you want, just to make a smaller image. So there's a bunch of different variations and options. So a couple things I did want to mention. If you have any comments or questions, definitely you can join our Facebook group. It's facebook.com/groups/cybersecrets. A couple of the websites that we are working on currently. One is called cybersec.tv, and cybersec.tv is going to be adding several different channels from not only YouTube but other sources. Cybersecrets.org is going to be related to these webcasts and the original Cyber Secrets series, along with 2 other series, including Quick Tips and Just the Tip, which deal more with again Linux small tips and then coding, things in that area. And then, of course, our main company website, informationwarfarecenter.com. So if you have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out. Again, my name is Jeremy Martin, and email is going to be jeremy@informationwarfarecenter.com. So in this instance, quick tips. The problem is, we want to update Linux, but kind of lazy, don't want to type everything in. So the solution is to create an alias. So right now we're creating an alias called CLS for clear, because we're used to just Windows commands. So in this specific instance, we type in cat /dot aliases, and we can see CLS clear. So now let's do something for the actual update. So we're going to make a keyword called powerup, and then do sudo apt-get, or apt, update, upgrade, and then verify it, close the window, reopen it, type in aliases, and now we can see powerup again. It has all the commands we want to do the upgrade. Now let's actually run it. This actually takes a while. Sometimes it can take a long while. But basically what it comes down to it is, instead of having to type in all that every time I want to update, now we just have to type in powerup. That's the beautiful part about aliases. Let's go ahead and wait until this updates. Speed it up a little bit. Okay, now we're done. Now go and clear, type in power up again, and we can see that it actually did do the update. Let's do clear. Now at this point, if there's any writing that you're typing in a lot and you want to get rid of that effort, just create an alias.
Linux quick tip, Cyber Secrets style. If you are using Linux and want a command line option for finding your external IP address, you can use the curl command. For example, curl ipinfo.io-ip. Or if you want to use the Tor network, you can use service, door, start, proxy chains, curl ipinfo.io-ip. In both examples, you should see the IP address that a remote system will see when you connect to it. This is very easy to use in scripts or for a quick validation of your internet scene presence or to validate that your proxy or VPN is working properly. Enjoy.